How do you end up standing in the hallway of a 4.5 million mansion you paid for, watching your own daughter carry trays like hired staff? Why did she look straight at me and call me the previous owner, as if I had never held her as a baby? And why did I walk outside, take a slow breath, call my lawyer, and say it was time to let the contract speak for me? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Mark Rivera, and I am the kind of man people look past. I do not dress like someone who signed seven-figure checks. I go home to a small townhouse on the edge of the city, not to one of the big houses on the hill. My neighbors think I am just another middle-aged engineer who comes home tired and falls asleep in front of the television. I let them think that. It costs me nothing. The only opinion that ever really mattered to me was my daughter's. At least, that is what I used to believe. That evening started like many others. I came back from my office after a long day of reviewing site reports and answering questions from younger engineers. I heated up some leftover rice and chicken, sat at my small dining table, and stared at the wall while the microwave hummed. On the wall in front of me was a framed photo, slightly faded now. In it, I was in my late 20s, sitting on the floor of a tiny rental apartment. A little girl with messy hair slept curled up on my chest. That was Lily, maybe 3 years old. My arms were thinner then, my face less lined. But the way I held her has never changed in my memory. I used to tell her that everything I did was for her. I thought she believed me. After dinner, I washed the pan, dried it, and put it back in its place. The house was quiet. No toys on the floor, no voices in the hallway, just the soft buzz of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I sat on the worn couch, opened my phone, and scrolled without really seeing anything. That was when a little notification popped up from the family group chat. It was the one Karen had created years ago. Me, her, Lily, and later her second husband, Gerald. The picture on the chat was of Lily holding her baby, Ava, a perfect little square, like a postcard of some other life. Karen had forwarded a message. It was from Patricia Connors, my daughter's mother-in-law. The text said there would be a small gathering at Lily's house that weekend, a kind of preparation for a larger charity event. Patricia wrote that a few people would come by to help plan the garden layout and see the space before donors arrived. At the end, in a short line, she added that it would be nice if Mark could drop in too, if he is free, like I was a friendly neighbor, not the person who made that house possible. I read the message twice. No one directly asked me if I could make it. No one waited for my answer. Gerald replied first, saying he would be there. Karen added a line about bringing dessert. Lily sent a little heart emoji. I just wrote that I would try to come. No one responded to that, but the messages kept moving on without me. It was not cruel, just casual. That is often worse. On Saturday, I put on a clean shirt and my best pair of slacks, the ones I wore to meetings where people still cared about suits. I checked myself in the mirror. The gray at my temples had spread more than I realized. My face looked tired, but my eyes were clear. I picked up a thin folder from my desk drawer. Inside were a few old documents with the address of Maple Crest Estate on top. I did not plan to show them to anyone. I just liked having them in my hand. It reminded me that I had not dreamed the last 10 years. The drive to Maple Crest took about 40 minutes. As the city center fell behind me, the streets widened and the buildings grew taller and cleaner. I passed a billboard that showed the entrance of the very community I was heading to. A smiling couple stood in front of their massive house with the slogan about dream living for modern families. I had first seen that image in a brochure when Lily was still in college. Back then, I had pointed at the picture and told her about the empty lot at the end of the main boulevard. I said that if I worked hard and was careful, she might live in a place like that one day. She had laughed and hugged me, saying she did not need anything that big. I believed her. I went ahead anyway. At the gate of Maple Crest, a guard in a neat uniform stepped out of the small booth. I rolled down my window and gave my name. He checked a tablet, then nodded and waved me through. No one had put me on any special list, but Lily's address was enough. I drove slowly past rows of large, bright houses with tall hedges and perfect lawns. Some had fountains, some had sculptures. All of them looked like they were trying to prove something. Lily's house stood near the end of the main road, on a slight rise. It was a clean, modern building with wide windows and a long driveway. I remembered standing on raw dirt here, years earlier, with a site map in my hands. Back then, there were no trimmed bushes or stone paths, only mud and exposed pipes. I had looked at the empty space and imagined Lily walking out onto a finished porch, holding a cup of coffee and watching the sun rise. I did not imagine what I was about to see instead. There were already several cars parked along the curb. Some I recognized from Karen and Gerald's neighborhood. One was a sleek black sedan I had seen Brandon drive before. I parked a little further away, not wanting to block anyone, and walked toward the house. Music floated out from somewhere inside, soft and tasteful. Voices overlapped, light and relaxed. I reached the front steps and paused. No one opened the door. I rang the bell, waited, and heard nothing change. It was possible they were busy at the back, getting ready for the garden part of the event. I walked around the side, following a stone path lined with low lights. Through a large window I could see figures moving around. I reached a side door that stood slightly open, probably left that way for staff and deliveries. I stepped inside quietly, into a hallway that led toward the kitchen and living area. The floors were polished, the walls painted in soft tones. I could smell something baking and hear the clink of glass. When I reached the open space at the back of the house, I stopped. There was my daughter, Lily, standing by the kitchen island. She wore a simple shirt and dark pants with a plain apron tied around her waist. She was holding a tray of empty glasses. Patricia sat on a high stool nearby, legs crossed, pointing at a printed layout of the garden on the counter. Karen stood next to her, nodding and making small comments. In the living area beyond, a few people sipped drinks and admired the view of the lawn, where a tent frame was already set up. Patricia was telling Lily where to place drink stations and how to position the chairs. Karen added that Lily had always been very good at details. Lily smiled weakly and moved to adjust some decorations on a side table. She looked busy, slightly tense, like she did not want to disappoint anyone. To someone who did not know her, she might have seemed like the hired planner. I took a slow breath and walked forward. My shoes made a soft sound on the floor. Lily turned her head and saw me. For a moment, her eyes widened. I saw a flash of something there, surprise, maybe a small flicker of guilt. Then it was gone. Her face returned to a polite smile, the kind you give someone at a work event. She came toward me with the tray still in her hands. Patricia and Karen looked up. A couple near the window turned to see who had arrived. Brandon stepped out from a side hallway, holding his phone. The room felt a little tighter. Lily greeted me in a careful voice. She said she was glad I could come, that they were just doing some final checks for the big charity event. She said many sponsors would attend next week, and Patricia wanted the space to look perfect. She explained all this like she was introducing me to a project, not to her home. Then she turned slightly toward the small group near the window. There were two couples about her age, and an older man who looked like some sort of partner or donor. They watched us, waiting to see who I was. Lily gave a small, strained laugh. She said something along the lines that I was the previous owner who helped them with the purchase and early work on the house. She added that I used to handle the property side of things. She did not use the word father. The older man nodded politely and said that it was always nice when previous owners stayed friendly. One of the younger men said that it must feel good to see how well their house had turned out. Brandon stepped closer, placed a hand lightly on Lily's shoulder, and said in a light tone that I had made a very smart investment for them and could now relax in my cozy place on the other side of town. People smiled at that. It sounded like a compliment on the surface. Underneath it was a simple message. My part was in the past. I felt the words as a physical weight, but I kept my face calm. I did what I have always done in uncomfortable rooms. I nodded, smiled slightly, and let the moment pass over me. I answered a few polite questions about construction and planning, nothing personal. When someone asked how long I had worked in real estate, I said that I had been in engineering for decades and moved into development later. I did not say, I am her father. No one asked. After a while, Lily excused herself. Patricia told her to check something outside and reminded her to ask the caterer about serving times. Lily hurried away with the tray, her apron string swinging as she walked. One of the guests commented in a soft voice that Lily was very hands-on. Patricia replied that Lily insisted on doing many tasks herself so that everything looked perfect for the donors. Karen agreed, smiling proudly at Patricia, not at me. I stood there in the middle of the room, feeling like a piece of furniture that had been left from an older layout. Useful maybe, but slightly out of place. I could smell the food warming in the oven, feel the smooth surface of the counter under my fingertips as I rested my hand there for balance. The music from a speaker in the corner played a calm track that did not match the tightness in my chest. I stayed polite for a few more minutes, then stepped back toward the hallway. No one tried to stop me. Someone called out a casual thank you for coming. Brandon said he would catch up with me later about some paperwork, as if I were a vendor. I simply nodded again and walked out through the same side door I had entered. Outside, the air felt cooler. I let the door close softly behind me. For a second, I just stood there, looking at the back of the house. Through the glass, I could see Lily moving quickly between the kitchen and the garden, her apron bright against the pale walls. She looked tired. She looked like staff. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound was sharp in the quiet. I took it out and saw an incoming call from a familiar number. Hannah Cho's office. As I answered, my other hand tightened around the thin folder I had carried with me. The corner of it bent slightly under my fingers, and the top page shifted just enough for me to see the printed words again. Maple Crest Estate. Trust Summary. When I answered the call from Hannah's office that day, I did not say much. Her assistant told me she would like to see me next week to go over some existing structures we had in place. The tone was neutral, professional. I agreed, wrote the date down in a small notebook I keep in my jacket pocket, and ended the call. On the drive back to my townhouse, old memories came with the steady rhythm of the road. It was not the first time I had felt like a guest in my own family story. That afternoon in Lily's kitchen had only made something clear that had been growing for years. I met Karen when we were both in our 20s. Back then, we lived in a small rental on the noisy side of town. The windows rattled when buses passed, and the pipes in the walls made strange sounds in the winter. We did not have much, but we had energy and plans. I worked long days as a junior engineer, taking every overtime shift I could. Karen worked at a small office and took evening classes. We did not argue about money, because there simply was none to argue over. When Lily was born, everything became tighter. I held her for the first time in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and coffee. She was a tiny, warm weight in my arms, wrapped in a thin blanket. I remember promising her quietly that she would have something better than what I had grown up with. I told her she would not have to worry about rent, about broken heaters, about tired parents arguing at the kitchen table. It felt like a vow, even if no one else heard it. The early years were a blur of sleepless nights, small meals, and constant calculation. I took on more projects. I climbed in my field. I studied code requirements after Lily fell asleep, tracing lines in thick manuals while Karen watched shows on the old television. We were both tired, and we did our best. Over time, our paths started to separate. Karen wanted more comfort sooner. She looked at friends who had partners in finance or management and wondered why we were still counting every bill. I wanted to build something slower but solid. Our disagreements were not loud, but they were steady. By the time Lily was 10, the space between us was wide. The divorce, when it came, was almost quiet. There were no dramatic scenes. We sat in a small office with a mediator, and Karen said she could not do this life anymore. I asked what this life meant. She said constantly worrying about money, about schedules, about me being distracted. I did not argue much. I had seen it coming. We agreed that Lily would live mostly with Karen, but spend regular time with me. I searched for an apartment I could afford that was still close to Lily's school. It was smaller than the place we had shared, but I made it bright. I painted one wall a soft color Lily liked and let her choose the bedding when she first came to see it. She walked through the rooms with a small backpack on her shoulders, looking around politely. She said it was cozy, and I chose to hear that as kindness, not as a polite way of saying small. Those early years after the divorce were some of the hardest I have known, but they also held some of my clearest memories. I remember picking Lily up on Fridays with my car full of tools and papers. We would stop for simple takeout, and I would listen to her talk about school while trying not to think about the projects waiting in my inbox. On Saturdays, we went to the park or to cheap movie matinees. On Sundays, I would wake early, plan the week, cook something she liked, then return her to Karen's place with a smile that hurt my face. When Karen met Gerald, I did not think much of it at first. She mentioned that he worked at a consulting firm and that he was very organized. Then she started to talk about the places he had traveled, the people he knew, the calm way he handled problems. Lily came back from weekends at their new house with stories about a big backyard, a pool, and a room that might be hers one day if things worked out. She talked about Gerald's car with the same excitement she once had reserved for our little drawing games. The first time I visited Karen and Gerald's house for a shared event, I stood at the edge of their polished living room, holding a plate of food I did not really want. Gerald walked from group to group, greeting people with an easy smile. When he reached me, he shook my hand and said in a friendly voice that Lily was lucky to have 2 solid father figures. Karen smiled, and people around us nodded, as if this was a simple compliment. Lily watched, not sure where to stand. I kept paying what I owed and more. I covered school trips when Karen said her budget was tight. I handled car repairs when Lily needed rides. When it was time for college, I drew on savings I had built slowly, one project at a time. Gerald also helped with tuition later, and I thanked him for that. I did not compete. I only wanted Lily to have what she needed. Over time, though, I started to notice small things. At school events, teachers would shake Gerald's hand like he was the main point of contact. Karen would introduce him by his title, then point to me and say my name in a lighter tone, as if my role was simple. In photos on social media, I saw many pictures of our family, where I was not in the frame. When I was included, the caption sometimes mentioned Lily's dad, Mark, in a way that made it sound like I was a guest. Then came Ava. When Lily told me she was expecting, she called from Karen and Gerald's kitchen. I could hear voices in the background, clinking dishes, and Gerald saying something supportive. Lily's voice was bright and nervous. I felt a rush of joy and fear. I told her quietly that I would be there, whatever she needed. She said she knew. The day Ava was born, I went straight from a site inspection to the hospital. I still remember the feel of the fluorescent lights on my eyes and the smell of coffee from the vending machines. Karen and Gerald were already there, along with Brandon and his parents. Patricia wore a neat jacket and held a small gift bag. She greeted me warmly, as if meeting a colleague. When the nurse wheeled Lily out to the maternity lobby with Ava in her arms, everyone leaned in. Cameras rose. Patricia stood ready with her phone. Brandon's father moved into position for photos. Karen positioned herself at Lily's side. They took group shots. Lily and Brandon with Ava, then Lily with Karen and Gerald, then Lily with the Connors' parents. At some point, Karen looked over and waved me closer. A nurse shifted, and I squeezed in. Someone snapped a photo of me holding Ava, but by then, the main rush had passed. Later, when I saw the photos online, the ones with me were the last in the series. The captions talked about both families without names. I noticed that the pictures that got the most comments were the ones with Gerald and the Connors, not the one where I held Ava close, my face lined and tired, but full of quiet joy. Time moved quickly after that. Lily and Brandon's wedding planning began. There were meetings at venues, tasting sessions, lists of guests. I offered to help with costs in a simple way, but Gerald and the Connors' parents insisted on handling most of the visible parts. They said it was their pleasure. I found my place in the background, writing checks when needed, staying out of the spotlight. One night, we all met at an upscale restaurant to celebrate the final choice of venue and date. The place had soft lighting, white tablecloths, and a view over the river. I arrived on time and waited at the host stand. The staff led me to a long table where the others were already seated. They placed me at the far end, between two people I barely knew. Brandon and Lily sat near the center, next to Patricia and her husband, with Karen and Gerald nearby. Brandon's father stood up halfway through the meal to make a speech. He tapped his glass and thanked everyone for coming. He spoke warmly about Lily joining their family, about the strong support she had from her mother and Gerald, about the way the Connors and Lewis households had given her a solid base. He gestured toward Karen and Gerald, then toward Patricia and himself. People applauded. At the end, he mentioned that they were grateful to everyone who had helped along the way, including professionals who made wise property decisions for the young couple. He did not look directly at me when he said that, but a few people at my end of the table turned their heads in my direction. I smiled and raised my glass, as I always do. It is a habit now, this quiet agreement with things I do not fully accept. After that dinner, Brandon approached me with a folder. Inside were early drafts of plans for a house. They wanted something modern, open, with a big garden where Ava could play and where they could host events. The lot was in a gated community called Maple Crest Estate. As I flipped through the pages, I realized it was the same place I had once pointed out to Lily as a future dream. Brandon said, in a polite tone, that if I wanted to be involved in the property side of things, they would appreciate the help. I said I would think about it. I did more than think. I worked. I studied the maps, checked the soil reports, negotiated with contractors. I put my own money into the project more than I had planned because I wanted the house to be solid and safe. On paper, it was placed into a trust structure designed for Lily's future security. I signed where I needed to sign. I believed this would be my lasting gift to her. The first time Lily walked through the finished house, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. She said no words at first, just hugged me. She whispered that she knew how much effort this had taken. I held her and said it was worth it. Later that night, she sent me a message saying she would never forget what I had done. Months passed. Events piled up. Social posts appeared. Slowly, the way people talked about the house changed. It went from the house Mark is building for Lily, to Lily and Brandon's place, to the Connors estate. At first, I laughed it off. People use names loosely. But then I heard Gerald, at a family gathering, explain to someone that the house was a joint effort between the Connors and Lewis families, with some helpful input from me on the technical side. Lily did not correct him. One evening, at a smaller gathering, I heard Brandon speaking in a relaxed way to a friend near the buffet table. He said that one day they would simply put the whole deed under the Connors' name and be done with it, that the original investor would sign whatever they needed once things were aligned. The friend laughed and asked if that was easy. Brandon said that the older man was not really part of their world anymore and that it would not be a problem. I was standing just close enough to hear every word. I do not think Brandon noticed. He went on talking about event plans and donor lists. I stood there, holding a glass of water, feeling something inside me become still. Not angry, not surprised, just clear. After that evening, after listening to Brandon speak about me like I was a loose end on a contract, my days did not change on the surface. I still woke early, I still checked project schedules, answered emails, and visited sites. I still came home to the same small townhouse and the same faded photo on the wall. But inside, something had shifted. I stopped waiting for things to improve on their own. I stopped telling myself that people were just careless with words. I started to listen and to watch with a different kind of attention. 1 week later, I met Omar at a coffee shop near the tech district. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to be on a laptop or in a quiet meeting. We had known each other for many years. He had been my site supervisor in the early days, back when we took on jobs that barely covered costs but built our reputation. Omar respected contracts and schedules the way some people respect prayers. He did not waste words. He arrived a few minutes late carrying a small notebook. He greeted me warmly and asked how my work was going. I said that some projects were steady and others were slow, like always. Then I mentioned Maple Crest, more to see his reaction than to share anything. Omar looked thoughtful. He said that in his circles people now called that house the Connors estate. He said this in a neutral tone, but he watched my face as he spoke. I nodded and asked how that name started. He told me he had first heard it at a supplier's office. They had said that the Connors family had a beautiful place there and that it was becoming a known spot for events. I asked him if anyone still mentioned my name in connection with the property. He paused, then said that younger staff did not know I had anything to do with it. Older ones remembered that my company had handled the early work, but they thought I had sold my interests long ago. I asked what gave them that idea. Omar said that Brandon had talked in a casual way about taking full ownership soon, like it was only a matter of formality. Omar hesitated then. He looked down at his notebook, then back up at me. He said that Brandon had also told a group at a lunch that the original investor was kind and simple and would sign whatever they put in front of him. Brandon had said it as a joke, but the meaning was clear. In his mind, I was no longer a real part of the picture, only a step in paperwork. I stirred my coffee, watching the liquid move. I asked Omar if he remembered the structure we had set up when we first bought the Maple Crest lot. He nodded and said that he remembered it was held in a trust, with me as the one in control. He said that at the time he thought it was a very careful move. I asked if he had ever heard anyone mention that trust lately. He said no, not once. Then Omar leaned forward. He said that he was not telling me all this to cause trouble, but because he respected me. He said that my name still meant something to him, and it bothered him to hear people speak as if I had already been moved off the board. He said that if I wanted to step away, that was my choice, but it should not happen because others assumed I was weak or confused. I thanked him. I told him I appreciated honest words more than polite silence. He said that if there was anything he could do, he would help, but he knew I was careful and would not act without a plan. We parted on that note. As I walked back to my car, I felt calm. Not happy, not sad, just calm. Facts have a way of clearing the air. On the way home, I did not drive straight to my townhouse. Instead, I turned toward Maple Crest. It was the middle of the afternoon on a weekday. Clouds moved slowly across the sky. When I reached the gate, the guard recognized my car and waved me in. I drove the familiar road up to Lily's house and parked behind a delivery van. From outside, the house looked peaceful. The garden was partly set up for the coming charity event. A large tent frame stood on the lawn, and workers were moving equipment. I walked along the side path, staying near the hedge, and looked through the big windows. Inside, I saw Patricia standing near the dining room, talking to a woman with a clipboard. They were looking at arrangements for tables and decorations. Karen was sitting near them, checking a list on her phone. Farther in, near the kitchen, I saw Lily. She wore simple clothes and an apron again. Her hair was tied back. She was carrying a stack of plates from the dining area to the kitchen. A hired housekeeper in a neat uniform was nearby, wiping counters at a slower pace. It took me a moment to understand the pattern. The worker did basic cleaning and simple tasks. Lily handled the more detailed, heavier work, following instructions from Patricia and the planner. At one point, a delivery driver came to the back door with boxes. I watched as Lily went to receive them. Patricia stayed where she was, only raising her voice slightly to say that the boxes should go to the storage room. The driver glanced past Lily and saw me standing outside the hedge. He asked Lily something, and she answered while looking back toward me. From where I stood, I could not hear every word, but I caught enough. The driver seemed to ask who I was. Lily replied that I used to handle the property side for them, as part of the purchase and early work. She said it like she was explaining the role of a contractor. The driver nodded and went back to his van. Not once did she use the word father. I stayed there a few seconds longer, watching her move through the house that I had built for her future. I watched her carry other people's plans, follow other people's orders, and change her words to fit the story they liked. I did not feel anger. Anger is noisy, hot, and bright. What I felt was something colder and more steady. It was a simple understanding. This house, this story, this image were no longer for me. They were not even for Lily in the way I had imagined. They were for a group of people who only valued things they could fully control. I turned back to my car. I did not go inside or ring any bell. On the drive away from Maple Crest, I knew exactly where I needed to go next. There is a building in the center of the city that I have visited only a few times in my life, but every visit has marked a turning point for me. It is not tall or flashy. From the outside, it looks like any other mid-rise structure with glass doors and a simple sign. Inside, though, it holds records that can change the shape of a life. It is the private bank and trust office where I had once sat with a serious advisor and drawn up documents listing Lily's name and mine in careful lines. I parked nearby and walked in. The air inside was cool and quiet. A receptionist greeted me and asked how she could help. I gave my name and said I wanted to review an existing trust connected to a property in Maple Crest Estate. She typed for a moment, then her face changed slightly. She said that, of course, Mr. Rivera, they still had my file and that one of the officers could meet with me shortly. I sat in a waiting area with tidy chairs and soft lighting. On the wall, there were framed photos of families standing in front of houses, of older people smiling at younger ones. The images were clean and bright. They made everything seem simple, like a brochure. I knew better. Families are not simple. Money is not simple. Trust is not simple, in any sense of the word. A man in a dark suit came out and introduced himself as one of the trust officers. He invited me into a small conference room with a long table and a glass wall. He carried a folder with my name on it. When we sat down, he opened it and pulled out a few pages. He began to speak in the calm, measured way people in his role often use. He said that the Maple Crest Property Trust was still active. He said that, according to their records, I was the grantor and current controller of the trust. He pointed to a line with my name listed as the one who could define and change conditions within certain limits. He said that the primary beneficiary named at the time of creation was my daughter, Lily. He noted that the trust had been designed to give her the benefit of living in the property and possibly receiving more later, as long as certain conditions were met. He glanced at one of the pages and mentioned that these conditions were somewhat unusual, but not unheard of. They related not only to financial behavior, but also to the maintenance of a respectful relationship. He said that their notes showed that I had taken care of all funding responsibilities to date. The purchase, construction, and property taxes had all been paid as agreed. There had been no changes made to the trust since its creation. He asked if I was considering any adjustments now. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I asked him to confirm again who held the power to make changes to the trust within the limits of the law. He looked at the page and said that it was me, and only me, as long as I was alive and mentally able. He said that no one else could alter it without my clear consent. I nodded. I asked if the bank had noted any attempt by others to inquire about changing the trust. He checked his system briefly and said that there had been questions about the general structure from someone on behalf of the Connors family months ago, but they had been told that only I could request changes. He smiled politely and said that this kind of interest was normal when families planned long-term. I asked to see a summary sheet, not the whole document, just the top page that listed the main parties and the type of trust. He slid one across the table. I did not read out loud. I simply let my eyes move over the lines with my name, Lily's name, the property address, and the words about conditions. My mind went back to that day years earlier, when I had sat with another officer in a similar room and signed the papers with hope in my chest. I had thought I was protecting Lily from future problems. I had not imagined that the problem would be the slow erasure of my role in her life. I asked the officer what steps I would need to take if, in the future, I decided that the conditions had been broken and that I wanted to redirect the benefit of the trust. He explained in broad terms that I would need to document the reasons, consult with my own legal advisor, and file certain requests. He said they had procedures for that, and that their role was to follow clear instructions backed by proper advice. I thanked him and said that, for now, I only wanted to confirm that everything was as I remembered. He said that it was. We stood, shook hands, and walked out of the room. Before I left the building, I stood near the exit for a moment, letting the cool air touch my face. In my hand, I still held the summary sheet he had given me, folded once. On it, the words at the top were clear: the name of the trust, the property address, my name as controller. I did not need to see more just then. I took out my phone, unfolded the page slightly on a small table near the door, and took a photo of the heading. It was not for proof. The bank already had all the proof. It was for my own clarity. Then I scrolled through my contacts until I found Hannah's name. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear as I stepped out onto the street. The call to Hannah from the sidewalk outside the trust office was short. I told her I had just confirmed some details about Maple Crest at the bank and that I wanted to sit down with her. She did not ask many questions over the phone. She suggested a time later in the week and told me to bring whatever I had. Her voice was calm, steady. It had a way of making the noise in my head quiet down. In the days before that meeting, I went back to my own office with a different purpose. My engineering and development office is not large. It has a few desks, some shelves full of binders, and a whiteboard with lines and numbers that only mean something to people in our work. For years, that room had been where I solved other people's problems. Soil issues, permit delays, cost overruns. Now, for the first time in a long time, I turned that problem solving toward my own life. I closed my door and sat at my desk. On the screen, I opened my email archives and bank portals. I searched for anything connected to Maple Crest. It was all there because I keep everything. The first wire transfer for the lot purchase, the staged payments to the builder, the invoices for materials and inspections, the property tax bills paid each year from my accounts, never late. I created folders on my computer with plain names, lot purchase, construction, taxes, upkeep. I downloaded statements and receipts, always checking dates and references. I did not need them to remember what I had done. I already knew. This was not about memory, it was about order. Then I looked through old messages. There were emails from Brandon thanking me for letting us live in your house while we build our base. There were short notes from Lily asking if a certain cost was too much, and me replying that it was fine, that I would handle it. There were group messages where Brandon called Maple Crest Mark's amazing project for us, with smiley faces. At the time, those words had warmed me. Now they were simply data. I saved those too, in a folder called Messages. I did not change a single word. I did not need to. The truth was already there. On a shelf behind my desk, there was an old metal box where I keep printed documents that matter. I unlocked it and pulled out physical copies of some key papers. The first builder agreement, a couple of letters from the bank confirming payments, a short letter from Lily from years ago where she had written in her own hand that the house was my dad's gift to me and my future family. I had forgotten that last one was there. The paper had a small coffee stain on one corner. Her handwriting was large and slightly uneven. I held it for a long moment, then placed it gently with the others. When I was done collecting, I put everything onto a small USB drive as well. It was a simple black stick, nothing special, but it now held a record of every major step I had taken toward Maple Crest. I slipped it into my pocket. It felt very light. The day of the meeting with Hannah, I arrived at her office a little early. Her firm occupies a floor in a mid-rise building near the financial district. The reception area is quiet, with a few plants and soft gray chairs. I told the receptionist my name, and she called Hannah. A moment later, Hannah stepped out, holding a legal pad. She greeted me politely and led me to a small meeting room with a table, 2 chairs, and a frosted glass wall. I sat down and placed my folder and the USB drive on the table. She placed her pad and pen in front of her. We began with facts. I told her, as simply as I could, about the last few months. I explained how Lily had introduced me at her house gatherings, how she had used the phrase previous owner and person who handled the property side instead of saying that I was her father. I described Brandon's comments about full ownership and about me signing whatever they wanted. I told her what Omar had reported from the business side. I tried to keep emotion out of my voice. I focused on dates, locations, and exact words as best I could. Hannah listened without interrupting. Her face stayed calm, but I could see her mind working. When I finished, she asked a few clear questions. She wanted to know when exactly the trust had been created, who had been present, and what the stated purpose was at the time. I told her. She asked if I had any written exchanges that showed how everyone understood the house back then. I mentioned Lily's old letter, the emails calling it my house, the messages thanking me. Then she asked something simple, what I wanted now. I sat back, looking at the table. I told her that I did not want to punish my daughter for feeling pulled by other people. I said I understood that social circles can be strong, but I also said that I would not fund my own erasure. I could not accept a future where my work and my name disappeared from the story of the very house I built as a symbol of care. Hannah nodded slowly. She said that the trust we had set up years ago was more than a financial tool. It also had what she called a relational condition. At the time, we had worded it to reflect my wish that Lily keep a respectful connection with me. It did not demand constant closeness or agreement. It simply required that she acknowledge me as her father and treat me with basic respect, both in private and in public, if she wanted to keep the benefit of living in the property long term. She reminded me that most people do not include such conditions. Many trusts only care about money, but I had insisted back then. I had told her that if my bond with Lily ever became only symbolic, with no real place for me, I would not want my work to stand under that symbol. So we had written the clause carefully, with examples and room for judgment, and placed it in the document. Hannah said that what I described now sounded very close to a clear pattern of erasure, not just a few careless moments. She said there were repeated public introductions where my role as father had been replaced by other words, in front of the same groups that now called the house the Connors estate. She said there were signs that they were planning to treat the property as fully theirs, without serious recognition of my part. She did not rush to suggest any action. Instead, she said that before making any move, we would need to organize all the evidence calmly. She asked if I had copies of payments, letters, and messages. I slid the folder and the USB drive across the table. She opened the folder, scanned a few pages, and nodded again. She told me that in cases like this, the law did not care about bruised feelings, but about patterns and proof. The question would be whether Lily, encouraged by others, had crossed the line from occasional clumsy wording to a sustained attempt to recast me as an outsider. If yes, the clause allowed me to change the direction of the trust as long as we followed proper steps. She asked if I had any recent contact with Lily outside of formal gatherings. I said that most of our interactions lately had been at events, not quiet visits. She suggested that if any natural meeting happened soon, I pay attention to how she spoke about me in front of others, especially Ava. Not to trap her, but to see how deep the new story had gone. When our meeting ended, Hannah said she would review the materials carefully and compare them with the trust. She said we did not need to decide anything that day. She reminded me that doing nothing was also a decision and that I should think about what I could and could not accept in the long term. I thanked her and left, feeling strangely lighter and heavier at the same time. A few days later, I got my answer about how Lily spoke when she was not on a stage. I was walking through the small park near my townhouse in the late afternoon. It is a simple place with a couple of benches, some trees, and a small playground. The air was mild. Children were running around, and parents were watching from benches. I saw a little girl near the swings who looked very familiar. She had Lily's eyes and Brandon's chin. It was Ava. She was pushing herself on the low swing, legs kicking. A woman stood nearby holding a small bag and a phone. It was Lily. For a moment, I considered walking away. I did not want to turn a chance meeting into a scene, but Ava saw me before I could decide. She jumped off the swing and ran toward me with the steady speed of a child who recognizes a familiar face. She called out my name in a bright voice, but she did not call me Granddad or any other title like that. She called me Mr. Mark, as if I were a neighbor or a teacher. She reached me and grabbed my hand, smiling up at me. She said that she remembered me from the big house. She said I was the man who helped Grandma and Grandpa and the Connors with houses. Her words were simple, but they landed hard. They showed exactly what she had been told. In her world, I was a helper. Not family, just someone who worked with houses. Lily caught up to her a moment later. Her face was polite, a little tense. She greeted me, said it was nice to see me. She explained that they were just letting Ava burn off some energy before dinner. She spoke as if we were old friends who had run into each other by chance, not as a father and daughter who had once shared a tiny apartment and big dreams. I asked Ava gently how she was liking the house. She said it was very big and that many people came to visit. She said there would be a party soon where important people would come, and that her grandma Patricia said it was very special. She used the phrase, our estate, repeating something she had heard. I turned to Lily and, in a quiet tone, mentioned that Ava had called me Mr. Mark. I said I understood children repeat what they hear. I asked her how she usually described me to Ava. Lily looked away for a second, then said that things were complicated. She said that in their social circle, too many titles and family explanations might confuse people. She said that Gerald and Brandon's parents were present a lot, and that it was easier for Ava to think of them as the main grandparents. She said that calling me Granddad in front of everyone might make things messy. She added that she hoped I would understand. She said I had my life and my world, and that she had hers now. She suggested that if I wanted to see Ava sometimes, it might be best to keep it simple and not push roles that did not fit the picture they had built. She said this without raising her voice. She sounded tired more than anything else. I listened, feeling each word fall into place. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded and said I had heard her clearly. I bent down, told Ava to enjoy the park, and stepped back. As I walked away, I passed a bench and sat down for a moment. Children shouted and laughed nearby. A dog barked in the distance. I took out my phone and stared at the screen. My hands did not shake. They were steady. I opened my calendar app. A date near the end of the month had a small note on it. Charity Garden Party, Maple Crest. Patricia had sent the invitation weeks before. At the time, I had not decided if I would go. Now the choice felt different. I tapped the date and changed the color to a bright red. I added a short note, meeting of stories. Then I closed the app, put the phone back in my pocket, and watched the light fade slowly over the park. The red circle on my calendar stayed on my mind for the next days. It was like a small light on a quiet dashboard, not flashing, just glowing. Charity Garden Party, Maple Crest. The words were simple, but I knew that event would be about more than donors and speeches. It would be a stage. The only question left was what story would be told on it. The morning after the park, I woke before my alarm. The sky outside my bedroom window was just starting to lighten. I lay there for a moment, listening to the faint sounds of the street and the steady ticking of the clock on my wall. For years, my first thoughts each day had been about projects, deadlines, and money. That morning, my first thought was about my name and where it did and did not appear. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, and watched the mug fill. Then I sat at the small table with a notepad. I drew a line down the center of the page. On one side, I wrote what I had given, years of payments, time, knowledge, energy, patience. On the other, I wrote what I had received lately in return. Careful distance, polite titles, introductions that cut out the word father, a granddaughter who called me Mr. Mark because that was easier for the picture others wanted. I looked at the two columns for a long time. I did not cry. I did not tear the page. I simply folded the paper once and slipped it into the back of my wallet. I wanted to carry it with me, not as a wound, but as a reminder. In the following days, I kept working at my office like usual, but whenever a gap opened in my schedule, my thoughts went back to Maple Crest and to the trust. I received a short email from Hannah. She wrote that she had reviewed the documents and my materials and that we should meet again soon, preferably before the charity event. She suggested a date and time. I replied that I would be there. On the agreed day, I dressed in a clean shirt and jacket and took the train downtown. I chose the train instead of my car because I wanted the time to think without watching traffic. The carriage was half full. People stared at their phones or out the window. I watched my reflection in the glass as the city passed behind me. I saw a man with gray at his temples, lines around his eyes, and a calm expression. Not important to most of the world. Very important to the small group of people who had built their comfort on his work. At Hannah's building, I took the elevator up to her floor. The receptionist greeted me by name and offered water. I declined. My throat felt dry, but I knew I would rather speak with a clear head than sip from a glass and hide behind it. Hannah came out and led me to the same small meeting room as before. She had a thicker folder this time with tabs and sticky notes. She sat, opened it, and looked at me. She started by summarizing. She said that the trust gave me clear control as grantor. It named Lily as beneficiary but connected that benefit to a reasonable, respectful relationship between her and me. It included language about public conduct, not in detailed rules, but in principle. It allowed me, with proper procedure, to change or even remove her benefit if that principle was clearly broken. Then she moved to the present. She listed the recent events I had described and the materials I had given her. Lily's introductions at the house gatherings, Brandon's words about future full ownership, Omar's reports from suppliers, Ava's use of the term Mr. Mark, Lily's explanation at the park about not wanting me in the picture. Hannah said she had seen trust disputes where people claimed harm over small slights. This, she said, looked different. It was not one careless joke or one tense meeting. It was a pattern that had developed over time and now shaped how others saw me in connection with the house and even with my own granddaughter. She said that if we waited longer, the pattern would only deepen. More people would know me as an old contact from the property world. Fewer would know me as Lily's father. Ava would grow up with one story in her mind, and that story would not include me in any real way. She folded her hands and asked me again, clearly, what I wanted, the future of the house to be. I took a breath. I told her that I did not want to throw Lily out on the street. I am not made that way, but I also told her that I could not let the house stay as a monument to a version of our family that left me out. I said that if people insisted I was not part of the family line, then my work should not stand as part of their foundation. I wanted the house to serve a different purpose, one tied to the values I still believed in: care, honesty, and clear agreements. Hannah nodded. She said there were ways to redirect a trust, to change who benefited from it. We could set conditions that moved the benefit from one person to another, or from a private person to a foundation, or some form of managed project. The law did not stop me from doing that. as long as we stayed within the rules we had set and the broader rules that apply to trusts. She suggested that we think not only about what we were taking away, but also about what we were building in place of it. She asked if there was any cause or type of work I had always cared about but never fully acted on. I thought of all the families I had seen during my career who struggled with housing, who lived in places that were not safe or fair. I said that if the house could not be a fair home for my daughter and granddaughter in both name and heart, then maybe it could be a fair home for others in a different way. Maybe it could support a project that helped people who were where I once had been, with good intent, but not enough means. Hannah took notes. She described, in simple terms, a possible direction, turning the trust benefit from Lily's family to a small foundation under my control at first, later under a board, focused on housing support. The house could be an asset for that foundation instead of a private stage. Lily would lose the special benefit, but the property would not be wasted. It would serve clear, honest work. We talked about timing. The charity party at Maple Crest gave us a natural date. Hannah said that if we decided to act, it would be powerful to complete the legal steps before that event and give formal notice at the gathering itself. Not as a show, but as a simple, open statement of reality in front of the same people who had watched my role fade. I listened and then said slowly that I was ready. Not eager, not excited, but ready. Something inside me had settled. I had given chances, looked away, and waited for things to correct themselves. They had not. Now I would answer in the one language the Connors and the others truly respected: written agreements. Hannah outlined the steps. She would prepare the documents to modify the trust, move the benefit from Lily to the new foundation, and set up that foundation in basic form. We would also prepare notices to the current occupants of the house, giving them clear timelines and terms. All of this would be lawful, registered with the proper offices, and effective as soon as filed. She would handle the technical work. My role was to give clear instruction and to sign where needed. We set a day at the courthouse to complete the filings. When that day came, the building smelled of paper and old air. People moved through the halls with folders and tired faces. Hannah and I stood in a short line at a counter while a clerk stamped forms one after another. I watched the clerk's hand move. Lift, stamp, slide. Each stamp sounded like a small door closing and another opening. Hannah checked each page before and after. She spoke with the clerk in a low voice, confirming that the changes to the trust and the new foundation registration would be recorded as of that day. The clerk slid a set of documents back to Hannah with a firm nod. Hannah turned to me and said, in a quiet voice, that from that moment the Maple Crest Property Trust no longer listed Lily as the beneficiary. The benefit now flowed to the foundation we had named. The conditions had been applied. The power in the structure had shifted. We stepped away from the counter. She asked if I wanted a moment alone, but I said no. I did not feel like a man who had just done something wild. I felt like a man who had finally matched his actions to a truth that had been waiting. Back at her office, we reviewed the next step, how to present this to the family. We agreed that the charity event would not be a show of anger, but a setting for clear communication. Hannah prepared printed notices for Brandon and Lily, for Patricia and her husband, for Karen and Gerald. These notices would explain that the trust had changed, that the house now belonged under the foundation, and that they would receive full details and move-out plans in writing. On my side, I went home and prepared in the only way I knew. At my townhouse, I cleared my small dining table. I laid out 2 items side by side. On the left, I placed the old photo of me holding baby Lily in our tiny apartment, her head resting on my shoulder. On the right, I placed the printed invitation to the charity garden party at Maple Crest. At the bottom of the invitation, Patricia's name stood out as host. I stood there, looking from one to the other. The photo was a record of a promise I had made to Lily without writing it down. The invitation was a symbol of the new world she had chosen, where my name did not fit easily. I picked up the photo and slid it into a simple folder, along with one of the summary sheets from the bank and a printout of the foundation registration. Not to show all of it, but to remind myself, if needed, that what I was doing was not based on emotion alone. It was grounded in documents and dates. A message came in on my phone. It was from Omar. He wrote that some partners were asking about more projects with me, independent of the Connors. He said that whatever happened at Maple Crest, he wanted me to know I was still respected in the circles that actually cared about clean work. I thanked him and told him we would talk later. The night before the garden party, I ironed a plain, dark suit I had owned for years. It was not new or fashionable, but it fit me. I polished my shoes and set out my tie. I checked the folder one more time and slipped the small USB drive into the inner pocket of my jacket. I slept better than I expected. On the day of the event, the sky was clear. As I drove toward Maple Crest, I saw banners along the road with the charity's name and the Connors logo. The guard at the gate checked a list, found my name, and waved me through with a polite smile. I parked on the street with the other guests and stepped out. I could hear music and laughter drifting from the garden behind the house. People in nice clothes walked up the driveway, talking about donations and contacts. I held my folder under my arm and walked with them, not ahead, not behind. At the front of the house, near the main entrance, I saw Hannah step out of a car. She wore a simple suit and carried a slim briefcase. Our eyes met. She gave me a small nod, the kind that says everything is ready. We walked toward the side of the house together, where the path led around to the garden. As we turned the corner, I heard someone testing a microphone. A voice said lightly that they would start the first toast soon and asked everyone to gather near the stage. I felt the stones under my shoes and the weight of the folder in my hand. I did not quicken my pace. I did not slow it either. I walked forward, into the sound of the crowd, ready to let the papers speak. The garden behind the house looked like a picture in a magazine. White tents, small lights in the trees, tables covered with linen, servers moving between guests with trays. A small stage had been set up near the back, with a microphone and a banner for the charity. People laughed, touched glasses, and took photos in front of the view. I stood near the edge of the crowd with Hannah beside me. From where we were, I could see Lily moving between tables in a light dress, checking details. No apron this time, but the same careful, tense expression. Patricia floated from group to group, introducing people. Brandon stood near the stage, talking with a man who looked like a major donor. After a while, Patricia tapped the microphone and asked for attention. The music lowered, and the crowd turned toward her. She thanked everyone for coming, spoke about the charity, and praised Brandon and Lily for opening their beautiful home for such a good cause. She called it the Connors estate. Many guests nodded, as if that name had always been true. Then she invited Brandon up. He took the microphone and gave a smooth, practiced speech about family support, hard work, and giving back. He thanked his parents, then turned toward Karen and Gerald and thanked them for standing behind Lily and Ava. He did not say my name. He did not look in my direction. When he finished, the crowd clapped. People started to raise their glasses. Hannah looked at me. I felt my heartbeat, steady and calm. I stepped forward. I walked toward the small stage and, in a clear voice, asked Brandon if I could say a few words as well. The room quieted more from surprise than from respect. Brandon hesitated, then, with the eyes of donors on him, handed me the microphone. I thanked him and turned to face the crowd. I kept it simple. I said my name, Mark Rivera. I said that years ago I bought the land under this house, paid for its construction and taxes, and placed it in a trust for my daughter, Lily. I said that this trust had a clear condition, that she keep a basic, respectful relationship with me as her father, in private and in public, if she wished to enjoy the benefit of living here. I said that over time, in this very place, I had been introduced not as a father, but as a former owner, a property helper, a man who used to handle the house side. I said that my granddaughter called me Mr. Mark because that was the story she had been given. Hannah stepped forward and began handing sealed envelopes to Brandon, to Patricia and her husband, to Karen and Gerald, and finally to Lily. I told them that inside each envelope was a formal notice. As of this week, I explained, the trust had been lawfully changed. The benefit no longer flowed to Lily and her household. It now belonged to a small foundation under my guidance, created to support fair housing for families who actually knew the value of a roof and a name. There was a murmur through the crowd. Brandon opened his envelope, read the first lines, and went pale. He said that this must be some kind of mistake, that I had promised the house to them. Hannah answered in a calm voice that the bank records, trust terms, and court filings were already in place. Promises, she said, had to be matched by actions on both sides. I did not raise my voice. I simply said that if my role as father did not fit their picture, then my work did not need to stand behind that picture. A property manager, waiting near the back, stepped closer and said that written move-out timelines and support options would be delivered to them in the coming days. Around us, guests held their phones up, recording. Some looked away, not wanting to be part of the scene. Others stared openly. Lily stood very still, envelope in hand, eyes moving over the words. Ava clung to her leg, not understanding, only sensing the tension. I handed the microphone back to Brandon. He did not take it. It hung there between us for a moment before a staff member reached out and lowered it. Then I turned and walked away, down the side path toward the front of the house. As I reached the gate, I saw workers setting a small sign into the ground near the road. It carried the name of the new foundation, simple black letters on a clean white board. The music behind me had stopped. The only sound was the soft click of my shoes on the pavement as I kept walking and did not look back.